Here I'm going to go over a couple of examples of using augmented matrices to solve systems of equations. So first you need to make the matrix of the system of equations. So the first column is your x's, the second is the y, and the third is whatever it equals. So if I look at my first row here, I have 2 x's, 3 y's, and it equals 9. The second one, I have 1x and negative 4 y's, and it equals negative 1. So what our goal is to get to a space where I have 1x and 0y, and it equals some number like 5. And 0 x's and 1y, and it equals some number like 9. So there's typically a line here. What this first row would tell me in this example is that 1x and 0 y's equals 5, so x is 5. And the second row is going to tell us that 0 x's and 1 y equals 9, or y equals 9. So if we get it in this form, then we're going to know what x and y equal. This is a different way of solving systems of equations. So in order to get it into that form, we're going to perform elementary row operations. So you just kind of target what you want to change first and then move from there. So it's good to just take one column at a time and to first change that one to whatever number to a 1. So I want to first change what's in this first spot to a 1. And I notice that my second row already has a 1 there. So what I'm going to do first, my first kind of step here, is to just switch the row 1 and 2. So I write down what I'm doing just so I can check my work later in case I make any mistakes. So I'm going to write row 2 here and row 1 here. So now we have a 1 there. Now let's do that column. So we need to change this 2 to a 0. How can we change the 2 to a 0? Well, if I multiply that first row by negative 2, so negative 2 times row 1, and I add it to row 2, then my new row 2 is going to be a 0. So let's see. So row 1 is going to stay the same. I'm going to write that down. We're changing row 2. So if I take the first row and I multiply this by negative 2, I get negative 2. And if I add it to row 1, I have 0. I have to do that for everything. So take the first row, negative 4, multiply it by negative 2, I get 8. And add it to the second row, I get 11. First row times negative 2 is 2, plus the second row is an 11. So there we go. So our first column looks great. Now we need to move on to our second column, and I want to change this spot to a 1. How can I change 11 to 1? Well, if I divide it by 11, then I would have 1. And I notice if I divide this by 11, I get 1 as well. So let's take row 2 and divide it by 11. So my row 1, again, stays the same. So I still have my 1, negative 1, or negative 4 and negative 1. But my second row, I'm going to take this 1 and divide it by 11. Then I get 0. Get this 11 divided by 11, I get 1. And this 11 divided by 11, I get 1. So we're almost done. We just now need to change this spot to a 0. And we can use the 1 to do that. If I take row 2 and multiply it by 4, so 4 times row 2, and add it to row 1, then this will be a 0. So again, what stays the same? We're changing row 1, so row 2 stays the same as 0, 1, 1. But now let's change row 1. I'm going to take row 2, 0, multiplied by 4 is 0, plus 1 is 1. row 2 multiplied by 4 is 4, plus row 1 is 0. Row 2 multiplied by 4 is 4, plus row 1 is 3. So now we have this in our simplified form, and I know, again, remember this is our x and our y, so this first row is telling us 1x plus 0 y's is 3, or x equals 3. Our second row is telling us 0 x's plus 1 y is 1, or y equals 1. Let's try one more example. So first I'm going to write it in row echelon form, again, x, y, and whatever it equals. So this first row is 1x plus 3y's equals 5, 2x's minus 1y equals 3. Okay, so our goal is to have 1, 0, 0, 1 all equal to some number, whatever those numbers are. So this one's already a 1, so that's great. So remember, you do one column at a time. So our goal is now to change this to a 0. So what I'm going to do is take the first row and multiply it by -2. Row 1 times -2 plus row 2 will give me my new row 2. So row 1 is staying the same, so I'm going to write that down. But row 2 would be the first row times -2 is -2, plus the second row is 0. The first row, 3 times -2 is -6, plus the second row is -7. The first row times -2 is -10, plus the third row is -7 again. So put a little line here. We're almost there now. Our first row, our first column looks good. Now our goal is to change this to a 1. So this is very similar to the last one. Sorry about that. But I noticed that this -7, I could just divide it by -7, and that would be a 1. So I'm going to take row 2, and I'm going to divide it by -7. So my row 1 stays the same as 1, 3, and 5. My row 2, though, 0 divided by -7 is 0. -7 divided by -7 is 1. And this is a 1 as well. So now we're almost there. We need to change this to a 0. So how can we do that? If I take row 2 and multiply it by -3, I would have -3, and then add it to row 1. What do we get? So again, row 1 is what we're changing. So row 2 stays the same, but row 1 is going to be 0 times -3 is 0, plus 1 is 1. 1 times -3 is -3, plus 3 is 0. 1 times -3 is -3, plus 5 is 2. So now we are in our simplified form. What is this first row telling us? 1x plus 0 y's is 2, or x equals 2. The second row is telling us 0 x's plus 1 y is 1, or y equals 1. So that is your answer.